Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jim Flood. I'm the chair of the Government Affairs Group at the firm of Kroll & Mooring, and we're very pleased that you are here to join us today for the next hour for our congressional briefing on the future of pharma and medical affairs professionals. We have today with us a wonderful panel and a really truly special introduction by Congressman Brett Guthrie, who is the ranking member on the Energy and Commerce Health Subcommittee, and we want to welcome the Congressman. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.
And we'd like to go to you in a minute for a few remarks. We have with us today Dr. William Salman, the CEO of the Accreditation Council for Medical Affairs. We have with us Dr. Paul Rowe, the Vice President and Head of Global Medical Immunology at Sanofi Genzyme. Dr. Jill Massey is also with us, the Vice President for Medical Affairs, Safety, and Pharmacovigilance at Gilead Sciences. Dr. Tina Kanmatz, an assistant dean and professor in experiential pharmacy education at St. John's University from the great state of New York. And we're very pleased to have with us Sarah Krug, the CEO of Cancer 101, to talk about the role of medical affairs professionals, in particular from a patient perspective. What I'd like to do, if I may, is go to Dr. Will Salman for a few remarks to introduce himself and ACMA, and then go to Congressman Guthrie for a few remarks, and then we'll continue at our program. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us for this important event. Dr. Salman?
Thank you very much, Jim, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for attending today's congressional briefing on the future of pharma medical affairs professionals. So as Jim said, my name is William Salman. I'm the founder and CEO of an organization called the Accreditation Council for Medical Affairs, or ACMA. And also, by way of background, I have about 20 years of experience as a senior level pharma industry executive. So I know the industry very well from the inside out. The ACMA really works to support and provide certification and training to this very important group of professionals that we're going to talk about in the industry, known as medical affairs professionals or medical science liaisons, also known as MSLs. Again, I want to thank you guys very much for being with us today, and in particular thank Congressman Brett Guthrie, who's of course in his own right a healthcare leader in Congress, for joining us as well. And so the purpose of today's session is really to provide Congress and the staff with information about medical affairs professionals and to continue this conversation hopefully in the months and years ahead. So I'll turn it back over to you, Jim.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salman. And Scott Douglas, I'd like to turn it over to you to introduce your friend and again, our wonderful ranking member on the E&C Health Subcommittee, Congressman Guthrie.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And certainly Congressman Guthrie needs no introduction to this group, so I think I can keep it short. But I do want to say thank you to Congressman Guthrie for joining us today. I've known Congressman Guthrie since he first ran for the Kentucky State Senate in 1998, and I've had the pleasure of working with him on many different things over many years, and I've always found him to be a man of high integrity and honor. Those are traits befitting a graduate of his alma mater of West Point. In fact, the only real shortcoming that I can attribute to Congressman Guthrie is that he frequently accuses me of being a University of Louisville fan, which he did within 1 minute of joining us just before this briefing started. Now, normally that's an unforgivable sin in the eyes of a lifelong Kentucky Wildcat, but in his case, I usually just let it slide. But those of you who know Congressman Guthrie also know that he is remarkably humble for somebody in his line of work. In fact, a few years ago, when I told him I looked forward to one day seeing him become the Republican leader of the E&C Health Subcommittee, he dismissed the statement with his trademark humility. But regardless, that's the very spot in which he finds himself today, and we couldn't be more pleased and appreciative that he's joined us today. So with that, Congressman Guthrie, why don't I turn it over to you? And thanks again for joining us.
Thanks so much, Scott. And if you didn't keep having black and red around you, I wouldn't accuse you of a U of L fan. I don't know, that black and red is not blue. So that's the kind of those watching. I won't get into Kentucky sports stuff. So we have Alabama connections too with each other. I just want to welcome everybody here. It's great to have everybody here in this important meeting. And I'm learning more about medical science liaisons myself. So everybody that works on the Hill, this is an important group of people. And so I'm glad that you're having the opportunity to see this presentation here, this roundtable. I went to graduate school in the mid-90s, and I remember seeing my first email. I remember seeing somebody sitting down 95 or 96 at a computer and say, I'm emailing somebody in Israel. I said, you mean what happens when they wake up in the morning, they're going to check their computer and this message is going to go through to them. And, you know, it's just hard to believe. When I say the mid-90s, some of you may think that's probably before you were born. But to me, that doesn't seem that long ago. So I was in the kind of the business world when the information age came. And I guess the biggest kind of early thought of that, we're all going to be know-it-alls because everybody has everything they need to know at their fingertips. But what's really happened is quite the opposite. Information technology, innovation has made us all so much more dependent on each other. Instead of us being know-it-alls, I mean, I couldn't change my oil before the internet. Now I can Google something and go on YouTube and learn how to do it. So there has been some ability to that, but there is no way that somebody even who knows how to work on a car can work on the cars of today without specific information and knowledge and training. And that's just in everything. No matter what you're in, things are just changing too rapidly to keep up in your field. And the thing that really attracted me first, I have to just from a budget perspective, I was in state government, as Scott said. So I got attracted to Energy and Commerce and the Health Subcommittee because of the ballooning Medicaid problem, the Medicare issue. And I thought, you know, I have some expertise on Medicaid from the state perspective to bring to the federal. I won't go there, except what really has gotten me excited and the reason I pursued kind of healthcare as my kind of niche. I'm a pharmacist. I mean, I'm a manufacturing background from the automotive world is just the innovation in healthcare. The fact that we can cure sickle cell anemia now. We're looking I have a friend that had a child die of cystic fibrosis in their mid-20s. Now they're probably going to live a full life. The medical devices, artificial pancreas, just things are changing so much in the pharmaceutical world and the medical device world. And I often wonder how in the world can a physician or a healthcare provider keep up with all the changes when you're seeing 100 patients a day just to keep if you're an endocrinologist, seeing 100 patients a day just to keep the doors open, and all of a sudden some great new product comes out, you have to have people with expertise in the pharmacy world and medical products world. I know we're focused on pharmacy today, and so having experts are important. And having experts in medical science liaisons, which I'm learning more about, are people who will learn their products and can educate physicians. Of course, you're marketing your product and understand that, but the best marketers are showing why their product is superior. And I think the best marketers aren't one to downgrade the competitor's product. I think with lobbying, people who lobby, I always think the best lobbyists are those who say, here's the issue, here's my belief, this is why the other people believe. Instead of saying other people are wrong, I like to hear this is what the other people believe. This is why we think our ideas are better or different. And I think that's what they're developing here. And for those on the Hill to kind of continue the theme of innovation, I think the one thing that's is going to hold us back if we don't reform is, and we saw the reform in Cures and hopefully Cures 2.0, is the government's regulatory ability to keep up with innovative change. And I think all of us are heartened. And if I worked for the FDA, I would just have my heart would have to be this big from just the esprit de corps for what they've done over the last year. And just to say, if government wants to do it, working with the private sector, not alone, because it certainly didn't happen alone. Matter of fact, it was probably 90% private sector, but the government wants to do it working with private sector, we can get big things done. And so I think I know I just have a brief time, so I want to kind of close with information is continuing. I remember in the 90s, information is going to double in 10 years and then double every year. I think it doubles about every month now, if not even every week. So we can't be experts at everything. We can no longer be know-it-alls. We have to be dependent on each other, and being able to rely on people with specific credentials that you trust is extremely important. So I'm glad that we're here today. I'm glad that we have medical science liaisons. I'm glad you're going to learn more about them. And I think they can help not only practitioners of medicine and healthcare do their job, but ask those of us who are involved in healthcare policy do our jobs better. So thank you for being on the call, and thank you for allowing me to say the introduction. I appreciate it very much. Thanks.
Congressman Jim Flood here again. Thank you very much as always. We look forward to the day when we can bring Dr. Salman and this team in to meet with you in person and your staff again. and likewise with the other members of Congress who are involved in healthcare and their staff. And we really appreciate having the opportunity for you to come join us, join us here today. And we greatly appreciate it. And I want to just reemphasize the point you made that having people with this sort of expertise engage with members of Congress and staff as you're thinking about and writing and editing important healthcare legislation. As a former Hill staffer, as both Scott Douglas and I are, I think we would say is very important, and I'm sure you would agree. And we thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Congressman, very much.
Thanks.
With that, folks, I'd like to go back to you, if I may, Dr. Salman, to introduce this concept of medical affairs professionals, medical science liaison professionals that has grown significantly over the last number of years. Talk about the role of ACMA, and then I'd like to go to Dr. Kanmatz to talk a little bit about what she sees from her perspective as a dean and professor at St. John's University. Thank you, Dr. Salman.
Thank you very much, Jim. And so I think, Congressman Guthrie gave a very good segue into the importance of medical affairs professionals and medical science liaisons. So who are they? So really, these are folks that are scientifically or clinically trained. They are physicians, PhDs, pharmacists for the most part. And their role, as the Congressman mentioned, is to engage with doctors, nurses, pharmacists, patient groups, even potentially congressional staff and others, and really to educate the community about new and complex prescription drugs and treatments. So they are pharmaceutical company employees, and they've grown in number in recent years as the industry has really come to the realization that you cannot really have professionals that are kind of right out of college, don't have a lot of experience or that scientific background to explain complex drugs and their mechanisms of action. So these medical affairs and medical science liaison professionals really do function as liaisons between the industry and the medical community, as well as also work with patient advocates who are playing a much greater role now as stakeholders in kind of this healthcare ecosystem. And ultimately, they play an important role for the patients, who are, of course, the ultimate end users of their drugs and treatments. And they often engage with the scientific and clinical research community. Matter of fact, 65% of scientific research today is actually driven by the pharmaceutical industry. And the pharmaceutical industry plays a significant role in educating healthcare providers, so providing support for education for these providers in the form of providing support for CME, continuing medical education. So medical affairs professionals and medical science liaisons could also work either in-house, in an office setting, or in the field. And again, they're made up of pharmacists, physicians, and PhD who, with their scientific backgrounds, can interact at a peer-to-peer level with what we call medical key opinion leaders, or also called external experts. And so these are physicians that are considered to really be the most influential within their space, within their therapeutic area. And these peer-to-peer interactions present value for the physicians and for the companies as well, and ultimately for the medical community and patients, because many of these thought leaders are involved in leading a lot of the major clinical trials that are conducted in the world today. So the medical affairs professionals really bring a unique value to physicians and other healthcare providers. And unlike the interactions that doctors might have with sales reps, the MSL role, the medical science liaison role, is to speak to not only the complexities of current drugs and treatments, but also to where the field is going, and to convey the product scientific methods, clinical trial results, and to help providers in many cases interpret that emerging clinical data. And so as we get more breakthroughs in medical discovery, treatments, and other interventions that have grown in recent years, the medical affairs profession actually has grown an astonishing 300% in the last decade alone, as I think companies have come to realize how important the role is, and it will no doubt continue to grow in the future as the complexities or, the scientific complexity of these products change. And so what are some of the characteristics of medical affairs professionals? So similar to all pharma industry professionals, they do need to comply with the voluntary code set forth by pharma, the trade organization. They are trained, as I mentioned, as physicians, pharmacists, and PhDs to understand the underlying science and disease state. They are not recent college grads, right? So these aren't people that are coming into a doctor's office and trying to simply educate the doctor in 5 or 10 minutes about the drug. As a matter of fact, on average, a medical affairs professional or medical science liaison has about 45 minutes of time on average with the doctor Compare that with a traditional rep who has about under 3 minutes on average. So a huge difference in terms of the time that they spend and the impact that they have on a healthcare provider. However, as Congressman Guthrie alluded to, a major concern with medical affairs professionals and medical science liaisons today is that while they're highly scientifically knowledgeable and trained clinically, they come from very different professions and they have a heterogeneous background. And so as you're going to hear about later, they're not necessarily adequately prepared to work in the pharma industry. And so they're not currently required either to undergo a standardized board certification process or credentialing process, as is required really in all other areas within healthcare. So I and the folks with me on the panel think that this is a major hole in the system that should be fixed and addressed. So the creation of an independent standard board certification process to ensure consistency, we think is really of paramount importance. Without a standard, really, these professionals could be relegated to quasi-sales-like roles, which would compromise the integrity of the position. And it's really to this end that the ACMA, our organization, was founded in 2015 with the mission of raising the bar for these pharma industry professionals and the industry as a whole, with a particular focus on medical affairs and medical science liaisons. We're actually the first organization, believe it or not, in the 250-year existence of the modern pharmaceutical industry to have established a board certification for these professionals. And so the certification is called the Board Certified Medical Affairs Specialist, or BCMAS program, which we've built engaging with the industry, and also we want to engage with members of Congress, certainly, and staff focusing on healthcare. Today, this BCMAS program, or Board Certified Medical Affairs Specialist program, is the largest and only accredited board certification program in the world. The BCMAS certifies these professionals, and it's a very rigorous program. Matter of fact, it's accredited by the same organization that accredits NASA. So the one message I just want to leave you all with today is this. As the Congressman mentioned, and just to reinforce, the need for highly trained and independently certified medical affairs and medical liaison professionals ultimately brings a level of honesty to the industry and to the profession. And I think everyone's seen what happened with the opioid crisis and opioids in general, and now what's happening just this week, you know, all the talk about AstraZeneca and the claims of allegedly cherry-picking clinical data. And so by board certifying medical affairs professionals, you're going to bring a level of trust, credibility to the industry, and ultimately comfort the American people and the public that the information they're being provided is truthful when it comes to new drugs and treatments like COVID-19 vaccines. So with that, again, thank you, and I'm going to turn it over to Jim Flood.
Thank you, Dr. Salman. And that is a perfect transition to Dr. and Professor Tina Kanmaz. Professor Kanmaz has seen medical affairs professionals both from the perspective of someone in the industry and from the perspective of someone in leadership and as a professor at a prominent pharmacy school. Dr. Kanmaz, what do you see in terms of the medical affairs profession, MSLs, the importance of their roles and the training that they receive in pharmacy school and how that relates to what they need to do when they enter the profession?
Okay, well, thank you. And hello, Congressman Guthrie and staff who are in attendance. And again, I am a full professor at St. John's University and Assistant Dean for Experiential Pharmacy Education. I have been here for over 20 years, but did serve a 3-year interim appointment as an HIV clinical science manager at Abbott Laboratory. So I was in academia, went to pharma and came back to academia. So I have a little bit of a unique perspective. And thank you, Jim, for that question, because I would like to focus my comments primarily on the educational training of pharmacists. And in short, pharmacy school does not adequately prepare students to pursue a career in medical affairs. Pharmacy programs across the country, we are accredited by the Accreditation Council for Pharmacy Education. And at a minimum, all schools do need to meet those ACPE standards, which tend to be primarily focused on patient-focused care areas and training students for traditional roles of pharmacy. So the volume of content in the didactic curriculum needed to meet the accreditation standards leaves very little room for us to cover non-traditional pathways of which we would consider careers in going into the pharmaceutical industry. So consequently, many students aren't really aware of the important and growing role of medical affairs. And those students who are aware or have heard about it, they really struggle to secure the actual hands-on experience that they need because they are so limited and competitive. And so just to give you a brief overview of pharmacy school training, there are many models out there. We could talk forever about the different models, but the one thing that is in common is students spend a minimum of 6 years to become a pharmacist. And the final year of their training, and many take 7 or 8 years, that includes the pre-professional as well as the professional years. So they're already committing a significant amount of their time to be trained. The final year of their training is spent completing advanced pharmacy practice experiences. So that's the experiential component of the curriculum where they get hands-on training. And it has to be a minimum of 36 weeks. Just to give you an idea, ACPE, which is the accrediting organization, says that students have to complete 4 required experiences in direct patient care areas, and then they have electives, but they have mandated that only 2 of those electives can be in a non-patient focused area, which would be an example of doing an industry related elective. And so my concern is that students who do want to pursue a medical affairs related career struggle to secure these very limited advanced pharmacy practice experiences. Fellowships are very competitive and limited. And my concern is long-term, as you've mentioned, that this tremendous growth in information and the need to have adequately trained experts, that where is the pipeline for these adequately trained medical affairs experts? As pharmacotherapy is becoming more advanced, biotechnology, pharmacogenomics are growing, the need for these highly trained experts is growing as well. But we don't have the sort of space in our current curriculum in pharmacy school to develop these new professionals. In fact, we did survey medical affairs specialists in 2018, and one of the questions we asked them is how well prepared did you feel that pharmacy school prepared you for your current role? And almost half of them felt that their pharmacy school training did not prepare them. So that is a definite knowledge gap there. And I'd just like to wrap up here that pharmacy is one of the most regulated professions in the country. And because of the tremendous amount of coursework and mandatory experiences that are needed to earn the PharmD, pharmacists who want to pursue specialty areas or non-traditional areas do often have to pursue other additional training and certifications to establish themselves as experts. They may go on to complete a PGY1, PGY2 residency, similar to the medical school model. They may go on to complete fellowships. Many also pursue certifications through the Board of Pharmacy Specialties. BPS offers board certification in 13 different patient-focused specialty areas. And then there are other similar certifications. I'm personally credentialed as an HIV expert through the American Academy of HIV Medicine. And so I'd just like to wrap up here that, in my opinion, in order to address the knowledge gaps for these much needed trained medical affairs specialists, it is essential that we have a similar approach of regulation and standardization as these other pharmacy-based specialties. And so I thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to addressing any potential questions later.
Thank you, Dr. Canmas. And that's a truly unique perspective and a unique look into the medical affairs profession from the perspective of someone who is on the ground, literally, at pharmacy school right now. For a slightly different perspective, sort of the real world, corporate perspective of who are medical affairs professionals and science liaisons and what do they do, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Paul Rowe, who's with Sanofi Genzyme, and Dr. Jill Massey, who's with Gilead Sciences, to talk a little bit about sort of case studies in the real world. Dr. Rowe, let me go to you first, please, and ask you to introduce yourself, and then to Dr. Massey, please. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to join the discussion. I must also say that the views that I present today are my own and not those of any previous or current employer. Taking on a quick reference to what Dr. Kanmaz was saying, being one of the physicians on the panel, I have to fully concur that medical professionals are certainly not in any way adequately trained or prepared for making the jump into the pharma industry. I, in fact, recognize it as a significant gap and have seen it as a gap for a number of years. I actually was lucky to actually be exposed to industry before my freshman year in college. I started interning at a pharma company where I'm from in New Jersey. And that's really how I learned that the industry exists and that there are alternative paths for those who wish to be physicians, that you don't necessarily have to be based in patient care or in an academic setting. And frequently, actually, even to this day, as a part of societies that I'm with, I do a lot of career development with physicians in training, and I'm one of the people who actually expose it as another viable career path for them to consider. So fully agree and concur with what she said. I'm not going to spend much time, but just taking it from a macro level and then going micro. It's unfortunate as I mentioned, I started in industry very young in the 90s, so I'm not that young. I wasn't born in the 90s. I won't reveal when I was born, but certainly I started in the industry actually in the 90s. And the perception of industry has really dramatically been impacted in a negative way since that time. And certainly, as Will has mentioned, the ecosystem in which we're working in, and as the Congressman also mentioned, it's increasingly complex. And we could probably spend a couple hours just talking about the intricacies of why the system is so complex and how it continues to evolve, for sure. But the big thing I want to stress on is that this negative perception really is unfortunate because especially as a medical professional, I didn't enter the industry and all of a sudden throw away what I learned in terms of the Hippocratic Oath and concepts of beneficence and non-maleficence. And certainly nobody that I've worked with in industry, when they join industry, all of a sudden throw all those things to the wayside. In fact, they become actually amplified and focused on more. And I would argue that, the evaluation, the constant evaluation and assessment of benefit risk becomes an integral part of our DNA in industry. And it's something that we have to do on a daily basis. And Dr. Massey can probably speak to that as well, being that she's in safety. And the other thing is that all healthcare professionals it's not a one size fits all. I know we're focusing on the MSL side, and that's the field medical force. But Dr. Massey and myself, we focus on other aspects of medicine within companies. So it's in a very diverse and varying ecosystem in which we work. And there are a lot of different roles, and all of us play an important role in making sure that patients come first. And it's not a matter of putting profits first, but really is, we all have the focus of making sure that we're getting the best treatments to patients. And unfortunately, that's not necessarily appreciated in today's environment as much as it should be. Now, I will say that, unfortunately, we've seen the focus on a number of cases where there were individuals, and there are individuals, as in any industry, there are bad apples in the bunch. And those examples that where people aren't acting in the best interest of patients get highlighted in the media, and rightly so. They are not acceptable and they should not be tolerated. I say that to say that we have a number of checks and balances that we have in the pharma business, and most of them are on the ethical, compliance, legal, regulatory side. But we don't have anything housed within medical itself. And if I were to liken it to an analogy, I liken it to medicine, where there's been a focus historically on curative medicine when we should have a shift, if you will, to preventive medicine. And that's where we need to go within the medical space. Currently, we don't have any competencies and really a focus on making sure that we have people who are qualified, who are trained, who are really fully competent across a standard. We don't have that standard. And that is problematic, quite honestly, because we're talking about individuals who are tasked with really being the gatekeepers, the stewards of science. There's a tremendous burden, although it is a cross-functional team and it usually consists of people with legal and regulatory backgrounds. At the end of the day, the burden of ensuring that the data and the science that's being communicated is accurate and valid really rests on the shoulders of those in medical and pharma. And when you don't have standards and when you don't have some type of benchmark, it's obviously an area where problems can arise. And we've seen that happen. So, we'll never be able to standardize companies, right? Each company is certainly different. There are companies that are very large, like the one that I'm currently at with over 100,000 employees, and there are companies with 25 employees. So you're never going to be able to standardize the structure, the regulations of a certain company, how they operate. But one thing that you can do that would make a difference is standardize the competencies for these professionals, because at the end of the day, they're tasked with the very same remit, if you will. And that's ensuring that they are the stewards of the science and that what is being communicated is accurate, it's fair, balanced, it's robust, and at the end of the day, it's doing what's right for patients. I had some other things I was going to talk about, but perhaps we can get to we'll come back to in the discussion. I want to give Dr. Massey a chance to also express her viewpoint. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. Dr. Massey? Dr. Massey, I believe you're on mute, please. Thank you.
See that. Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. I, like Dr. Rowe, these are my personal views, not those of any previous or current employer. I am the Vice President of Medical Affairs, Safety, and Pharmacovigilance at Gilead Sciences, and I thought I would use my own personal journey in pharmaceutical industry as a case study to demonstrate to the choices that I've made the value of the ACMA Standardized Education and Certification Program. I chose a career as a healthcare professional, as did both of my parents, because of our shared love of science and education and a desire to positively impact patient outcomes using both of those things. I started as a clinician and academician, providing care for one patient at a time, teaching students and colleagues about practice guidelines, and learning myself about new therapies from expert presentations at scientific conferences and congresses, and reading through peer-reviewed literature. I chose to join the pharmaceutical industry so I could affect patient outcomes on a much broader scale by educating patients and other healthcare professionals about our innovative research, the most appropriate patients for the use of our therapies, not all patients, and how to balance the risk-benefit profile of our medications en masse, as Dr. Rowe just pointed out. I soon discovered that the scientific congress and conference schedules, coupled with word length limitations in scientific publications, meant that large volumes of data developed by these innovator companies on their products were in company files, data on file, and not publicly available. This was information that could critically and potentially benefit patients and healthcare providers that treat them. As opposed to healthcare providers not employed by the biopharmaceutical industry, it's important that we understand that healthcare providers employed by industry must adhere to a myriad of constantly evolving guidelines and regulations that govern the conduct of our evidence generation and the sharing of this information with patients and clinicians that you just heard about. Over my 28 years of industry practice, I've learned how company-sponsored clinical trials generate evidence to support unmet clinical needs, how risk-benefit profiles are developed, updated, and safeguarded by the safety and pharmacovigilance departments in these companies, how regulatory affairs departments develop and submit data packages on our products to healthcare authorities across the world for approval, and how ultimately the medical affairs departments can facilitate patient access to innovative medicines that affect patient outcomes by sharing this evidence, and as importantly, collecting their perspectives once they use these products to inform our clinical development programs and again affect patient outcomes. Upon discovering the ACMA's learning curriculum and certification program myself, I saw that my decades of on-the-job learning could be consolidated into a comprehensive standardized offering to force multiply and accelerate these learnings among other medical professionals across all medical affairs departments in the pharmaceutical industry. The month of March presents a particularly poignant reminder of the importance and value of this for me and a sisterhood of women that I actually didn't choose to be part of, but for which I am now a lifelong member. I'm one of the now nearly 300,000 women diagnosed with breast cancer every year. As you may know, breast cancer is the most commonly diagnosed cancer and second leading cause of cancer deaths in women in the United States, with almost 44,000 women expected to die of breast cancer this year alone. Triple negative breast cancer is a particularly aggressive form of breast cancer with a high relapse rate and poor outcomes, and accounts for about 15 to 30% of all diagnosed invasive breast cancers. Women with triple negative breast cancer have about a 30% chance of surviving past 5 years. And TNBC, as we call it for short, has a higher prevalence among younger women, women of African or Hispanic Latina descent, and those with BRCA1 mutations. Compared with non-Hispanic white women, African American women have an approximately twofold higher mortality rate, resulting in a disproportionately higher risk of death from triple negative breast cancer. Advances in breast cancer screening and access to treatment over the last few decades have reduced the overall breast cancer mortality rate, yet the alarming impact on racial and ethnic minority communities is still evident. The month of March is designated as Triple Negative Breast Cancer Awareness Month by the TNBC Foundation and provides an opportunity for medical affairs professionals like me, healthcare professionals like me, and patients turned patient advocates like me to promote awareness and education about the disease, appropriate screening and preventive care, and the new therapies available to improve early detection, patient outcomes, and overall survival in all populations affected by this disease. The ACMA certification program can enhance our impact in doing so by ensuring the medical affairs professional level of competence as we provide patients and their clinicians with a trusted source of information on these topics. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you today.
Thank you, Dr. Massey, and we deeply appreciate it. And thank you, Dr. Rowe, and thank you, Dr. Massey, for sharing your personal experience. Dr. Salman, we've now heard a perspective from Dr. Kanmas in academia, from Dr. Rowe and Dr. Massey in industry, and that is a perspective on the importance of the medical affairs profession and medical science liaisons, but also the need for certification and training to ensure high standards and that the latest developments in the industry are reflected in that profession. Let me go back to you to sort of pull that together and explain a little bit more about how you're trying to accomplish that mission through ACMA, please.
Thank you very much, Jim, and thanks again to my colleagues. So why focus on creating and requiring this board certification by an independent accrediting entity like ACMA? As you heard from the previous presentations, the role that medical affairs and medical science liaisons play is very, very valuable. They have a tremendous impact on the healthcare ecosystem. At the same time, you also heard some of the concerns around the knowledge and competency gaps. So what would it mean to be board certified as a medical affairs or MSL professional so that they're at their best? So kind of let's dig into that in a little bit more details. So if properly board certified in medical affairs, these medical affairs and medical liaison professionals will be trained on a consistent basis to identify the issues that were of particular concern by federal and state regulators when it comes to the introduction of new drugs and indications. For example, you could require BCMS certification, which would ensure that the knowledge and the integrity of these professionals meets a uniform, consistent standard of excellence to protect the public by bringing accurate and objective information to healthcare providers. You could require BCMS certification, which would send an important message to the public that the pharmaceutical industry is being held to a higher standard with greater accountability by an independent entity versus policing themselves. This would also significantly increase public trust in the industry. Keep in mind, although it seems like a long time ago, just in the end of 2019, the Gallup poll rated and ranked the pharmaceutical industry the lowest in terms of trust among the American public out of 25 industries. Requiring BCMS certification would demonstrate that the pharmaceutical industry emphasizes the importance of medical affairs and MSL professionals and that they're really distinct, truly distinct from sales and commercial influence. As a specific, more tangible example, having board certified medical affairs specialists certified for MSLs and medical affairs would serve as a best practice, for example, in mitigation initiatives and future opioid settlements or public policy. ACMA could serve as an essential organization to implement medical affairs professional board certification for pharma companies with the compliance or other components selected by your state attorney generals and those under what we call in the industry a CIA or corporate integrity agreement for some type of violation. This would ensure an independent monitoring mechanism for complying with certain competency and ethical standards. And then in terms of other ways where the ACMA can help in the opioid settlement, for example, requiring those drug manufacturers to obtain a board certification for their medical affairs MSL professionals and requiring the use of medical affairs and MSL professionals by pharma companies when introducing new drugs that are involved with some kind of state attorney general settlement. And requiring those pharma companies that are settling to pay MSLs and medical affairs professionals to be independent scientific observers for state attorney generals for compliance with opioid settling agreements. So this, really I think provides a transformative moment in my eyes and kind of a new era as to where we need to go as an industry. Like Dr. Rowe and Dr. Massey mentioned from the industry perspective, other industries in healthcare and other industries in general have a credential, have a certification. What we do within medical affairs plays such an important role when it comes to the generation of new clinical trial data. And I think now more than ever, we see that with COVID-19. So like with other professions, certification of medical affairs and medical liaison professionals is going to result ultimately in long-term mastery and requires continued professional development and raises the bar, right, and safeguards the future risk for the public. And I think with all of that, it's clear to see that having these board certified professionals are essential to the future of the healthcare in terms of its integrity in the U.S. and around the world in general. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Dr. Salman. We've heard a good bit about how this profession that really grew up in the last 15 years or so, the profession of being a medical affairs professional or medical science liaison, many of whom, as some of our panelists work in industry, these scientifically trained individuals to explain new drugs, developments in old drugs, and some of these more complex concepts to physicians and patients and others is very important, and certainly an evolution from the model that I was used to when I graduated from college, where individuals right out of college would walk into a doctor's office and introduce a drug. The one thing we haven't talked about is the patient perspective on this. And so I'm very pleased that we have with us Sarah Krug, the CEO of Cancer 101, to talk a little bit about what she sees and all the good work she does and what the value of these individuals and the scientific and medical information they provide is from a patient perspective. Sarah?
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I'm Sarah Krug. I'm a researcher by trade. I'm a patient advocate by choice. I've worked across sectors from a cancer researcher at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center to varying roles at Pfizer, including research, medical education, and patient advocacy. And I now lead two organizations as founder of the Health Collaboratory, which is a global innovation hub that's built on the foundation of cultivating trust and human-centered participatory design to amplify the voices of the patient, the care partner, the clinician, and others across the continuum of care in the co-design of the future of healthcare. I'm also CEO of Cancer 101, which is a patient advocacy organization that's focused on empowering patients and their families to navigate healthcare in partnership with their healthcare team. And I love this conversation. We live in an interesting time where the advent of the internet has exponentially increased the free flow of information, right? We have access to more information than ever before. It's made us more curious. It's empowered us to be more informed as we make decisions in life. And in healthcare, we can research our symptoms, our conditions, we can search on terminology, we can even access research to some degree. And the digital age has facilitated engagement and empowerment, and patients and their care partners can use resources to gather information, to obtain support, and even connect with one another. And although it's made the search for answers seemingly easy to access, in parallel, it's led to information overload, which can be overwhelming and cause confusion as patients are confronted with unreliable sources and conflicting information, and really a lack of continuity in navigating that clear path forward. And we know that a tsunami of information can enlighten, but also confuse the average patient. Approximately 90 million adults have trouble understanding and acting upon health information in the US alone. And again, with the advent of the internet and technology, information overload is a growing problem and has been linked to greater stress and poor health. And the initial step in overcoming the shock of a health diagnosis is typically an attempt to gain a sense of control through information, right? Knowledge is power. But if you search online for something like cancer, it leads to over 800 million hits. So where do I start is a common question that patients and their care partners ask. And learning about their diagnosis has often been compared to learning a new language, especially for those with no previous health background. And for many, the labyrinth of questions, the countless pages of answers, and the fear of the unknown, it can be overwhelming and confusing. So how are we protecting patients and their care partners who are navigating the healthcare system for the first time? When patients access education, they need to understand the origin of the information, how it's managed, the medical accuracy, how current the information is, and the privacy policies if any information is being collected. And all of that must be done on top of them trying to manage their health condition and then dealing with the emotional journey. That's really highly unlikely. But at the end of the day, when a patient's ill, they need to understand the various care options available to them and the risks and the benefits associated with those options so that they can make an informed decision on next steps. They need a lifeline. They aren't necessarily in the right frame of mind to assess the caliber of an educational resource. And on top of that, now more than ever, trust in information has become a growing issue, right? The COVID-19 pandemic, the ripple effect that's tarnished trust even more with the initial uncertainty and conflicting information from authoritative sources. There's growing mistrust in science, skepticism on whether it can be influenced and whether both the good and the bad are truly made transparent. And we know that misinformation can have devastating consequences. And we all know that trust is one of the most important building blocks in any relationship, whether it's trust in a friend, a partner, a colleague, and even your doctor, right? Trust is fragile. It takes time to build, it takes seconds to break, and an eternity to repair. But trust is the cornerstone of the interactions that a patient has with the healthcare system. And when trust is tarnished, it can lead them, to them disengaging with fewer patient-doctor interactions, lack of continuity in their care, or even avoiding care altogether. And then there's a ripple effect to mistrust because it can lead to poor health outcomes and it can fuel health inequity. And so where are the guardrails when it comes to protecting patients to ensure they're accessing information and education that's going to help them instead of potentially harm them? How can we apply what we've learned about ethics in research to ethics in patient education? We've taken a first step at creating a trusted ecosystem, or health GPS for patients, where we've started to curate content from credible sources, where a patient can come in, plug in their condition, their phase in the journey, their medium of choice, whether it's a book or a podcast, and based on their preferences, they can access educational resources from credible organizations. So we've taken that first step in curating the cream of the crop, where patients can access this information and clinicians can provide these information prescriptions directly to patients. But that's not enough. We haven't validated the scientific content, since that's a major undertaking. But we are working on a code of ethics to prominently recognize those organizations who commit to a set of guiding principles with the intent of making this information available to patients through a code of ethics seal, for instance. And some of those guiding principles include some of the things mentioned earlier, ensuring that the information is unbiased, it's fair balance, that it's evidence-based, and if it's experience-based, which is also important, that it's disclosed as such, that it's peer-reviewed, that there's a content validation process in place, that any conflicts of interest be disclosed, And there's transparency around who was involved in the development and support of the education and so on. But that's just one step to ensure we're getting the right resources into the hands of the patient at the right time. And I see medical affair professionals as an integral step in this process, right? They can serve as the ambassadors to ensuring that patients have access to trusted content and up-to-date science over time. They can arm clinicians with the right resources to provide their patients. They can also serve as the connectors. You know, medical affairs professionals have an extensive amount of science in their wheelhouse, and they have a vital role to play in the dissemination of that science, even if it means that there needs to be an intermediary that can translate that science into a language that the average person can understand and act upon. And that requires education and standards for medical affairs professionals. You know, medical affairs professionals can help combat a world filled with misinformation. They can help restore trust in science and trust in healthcare, no pressure. But in order for us to truly put every patient first and ensure that our loved ones who may be diagnosed with a condition one day, in order to ensure they have access to trusted information that provides all of their care options, the risks and the benefits, in a clear and concise way so that they can understand and make informed life-altering decisions, we need to deploy an all-hands-on-deck approach. And I welcome you all to join me on this journey. Thank you for your time today.
Sarah, thank you so much. That was very, very helpful and sort of made the point that the need for this truthful and accurate and scientific knowledge transcends from academia to industry, to providers, to patients, you know, across the board. We have a little bit of time left. And what I'd like to do, Dr. Salman, is ask a few questions. I would go to you first to see if you'd like to do so, or I have a few as well.
You can feel free to start.
Sure. Dr. Massey, and Dr. Rowe, Dr. Massey, let me go to you first. From where you sit, where do you see the profession going? Because certainly I see and others see it growing and the need for certification like that provided by ACMA growing. But 5 years, 10 years from now, what do you see as the role of medical affairs professionals, and does it continue to grow?
I think it does continue to grow. I think that our role today is to contribute to innovative evidence generation and the dissemination of that information, as you heard previously. That information then creates opportunities for access of patients to our medications and certainly decision support for healthcare providers in assessing who is a potentially eligible patient for our medications. I think that will continue and expand. I think that the methodologies we use will continue to advance in terms of technology or best ways to communicate this. I think our engagement with patients will also increase. Back 28 years ago, it was only communicating through these learned intermediaries, as you heard Sarah talk about. But now we have the opportunity to communicate directly with patient advocacy groups and patients themselves to ensure they can make the best decision regarding their care. Oftentimes, especially in oncology, it's no longer about quantity of life, but quality of life. And the patients need to be as informed as their healthcare providers.
That makes sense. Thank you. Dr. Rowe, what do you see prospectively 5 years, 10 years from now in the profession and with regard to the certification?
Yeah, I wish I could say that I have a counterpoint to Dr. Massey, but I think she really hit the answer right on target. The first thing is data generation. Data generation is continuing to evolve. Mastery of big data, real world evidence. How does medical really make sure that we're harnessing big data and really moving forward with real world evidence, as opposed to our traditional trials is the way, traditional clinical trials is the way we have usually done it, but we're seeing the value and the speed of real world evidence is something that we really is continuing to explode, and it's something that we need to get a mastery of, and it will continue to grow, coupled with mastering big data, which is something that I think is still a challenge, and I think medical plays an integral role in figuring out how better to harness that information. And then the other piece you mentioned, which I fully agree with, is you have that on one side, and then you have this concept of patient centricity. How do we
Yep.
do a better job, of not, I've spoken at many conferences and lectures about, patient centricity seems to be a buzzword, but really what does patient centricity mean? And how do we really truly make that come to life? And I think I've been at a couple of conferences with Sarah as well, talking about this topic. I think we've made some strides in the right direction, but I don't think we're there yet. So I really do see medical, this goes to some of the things I wanted to talk about and Dr. Salman had mentioned it. Medical really serves as internally in the companies as the link between the colleagues in science, in R&D and clinical, and the link to our commercial colleagues. But also externally, we all often serve as a bridge as well to the company, to healthcare practitioners and patients. And these are really key links that we functions that we serve. And I still think we're at the tip of the iceberg in terms of how we've been optimizing, serving as that bridge and as that liaison or link in those key areas.
Professor Kanmaz, do you see education about medical affairs professionals, MSLs, the ACMA style certification growing as part of the pharmacy curriculum in the future?
I do not. Unfortunately, I'll share a very short story with you. I have been on the curriculum revision committee at St. John's for 5 years now. We have been working on designing a new curriculum, and it's taking us this long because everyone feels that their content area is important, and everyone wants more time devoted to the basic sciences, the clinical sciences, the social administrative sciences. We're barely getting in the bare bones of what needs to be in our curriculum. We were able to squeeze in two credit electives in a 4-year professional pharmacy program, and that was a fight. So I unfortunately, unless we continue to extend the length of pharmacy education training, I do not see how we're going to be able to add in any additional training around the area of medical affairs.
Well, it seems that in addition to highlighting the role of medical affairs professionals and MSLs in Congress and with congressional staff and with policymakers here in Washington, D.C., we certainly have some work to do in academia, and I know Will is committed to doing that. Dr. Salman, let me go to you for the final minute to bring us together and talk about where you see the profession going and how you're trying to sort of build ACMA to address that as we grow medical affairs professionals and MSLs in the healthcare sector.
Thanks, Jim. I would agree with all of my colleagues. I think all very important points. Ultimately, I think the question is, is kind of twofold. One, how do we protect the integrity of the medical affairs profession? And Dr. Rowe made a really important point. You can't standardize companies, but you can standardize competencies. And that's really important. And the second thing I think is related really to, from an external facing perspective, patients now and patient advocates are becoming a much more important stakeholder. So we have a responsibility to make sure that there's transparency, there's objectivity, and that, to put it simply, we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. How we interpret clinical data, how we approach certain functions, because otherwise it's kind of like the wild, wild west, right? It's the same reason why a pharmacist, when they graduate, they can't go practice in Walgreens or CVS, right? They have to get what? They have to get licensed. How do they get licensed? They have to go through examination and assessments. So why is that there? It's to provide a standardization, to ensure that at a minimum, they have a minimum basic level of knowledge. And I think the same applies for medical affairs and MSLs.
Sure. Well, with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon for this important discussion. This congressional briefing is being recorded, and we will be providing it not only to attendees, but to other staff across the Hill, and we encourage and welcome you to do the same. And we'll be providing more information. And in addition to that, we look forward to talking again about this issue, this important issue in the future. And with that, Dr. Salman, Dr. Rowe, Dr. Massey, Dr. Kanmaz, Dr. Krug, thank you very much, all of you, for all the good work that you do and to continuing to grow and work to ensure the integrity of this important profession. Thank you very much and have a nice afternoon. Goodbye now.